Welcome back to Crime Time, Inc. Today, we're going to be looking at Jodi Harris. She is an Australian con artist. A lot of people compare her to Frank Abagnale.
Oh, right.
Catch me if you can.
Yes, I see the comparison, yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting because she adopted so many different identities.
It is, and I think what makes her stand out, really, is that it's not just the number of identities, it's the range of professions that she chose to impersonate.
Right.
I mean, she was everything from a flight attendant to a psychologist, a doctor.
And even a police officer.
Yeah, and that last one, that's particularly fascinating, especially when you consider her background.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. It's almost like she had this kind of vendetta against law enforcement. And to understand that, I think we need to go back to her childhood.
Okay.
So, just imagine being 11 years old.
Yeah.
And you see your mother and stepfather get arrested on drug charges.
Yeah, that's got to be traumatic for anyone, let alone a child that young.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to see how an experience like that could lead to a real distrust of authority figures, even a resentment.
Right.
Some experts even believe that early exposure to the criminal justice system might have been what sparked her later obsession with it.
Right, and it gets even more complicated because after her parents' arrest, she was sent to live with family members. And there were allegations of abuse during that time.
Yeah, it paints a pretty bleak picture of her formative years.
Yeah, it does.
It's kind of a textbook case, really, of a troubled past that ends up leading to a life of crime. But what I think is striking is how early she started.
Yeah.
To actually manipulate the very system she seemed to despise.
Yeah.
I mean, at 15, she tricked a 32-year-old police officer into a relationship by pretending to be 21.
That's pretty bold, even for a teenager.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how she was able to pull that off. Was it just, kind of youthful audacity, or was there something else going on, some deeper psychological mechanism?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's probably a combination of factors. I mean, she clearly had some natural intelligence and this knack for deception. But I think there's also an element of risk-taking there.
Yeah.
A thrill-seeking part of her personality.
Oh, for sure.
That might have, drawn her to this type of dangerous game.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it wasn't a one-time thing.
Right, exactly.
Years later, she walks into 2 different police stations.
Wow.
Flashes a fake badge.
Really?
Pretends to be an officer from another state.
Oh my God.
And spends time with detectives gathering information.
It's a little disturbing when you think about it. She was using those interactions to learn more about police procedures, which she then turned around and used to her advantage to avoid being caught later on. It's like, it's twisted. Like, she was educating herself on how to beat the system from the inside.
Wow. Yeah. That's a really good way to put it. So she's clearly comfortable in these high stakes situations. She's learning how to manipulate, people in authority.
Yeah.
But how did she actually use those skills to pull off these elaborate scams?
Well, her approach was surprisingly straightforward. I mean, she basically relied on stolen identities. So bank cards, driver's licenses, anything with personal information on it. And she just used those to buy things, open bank accounts, essentially become someone else.
But she was like a chameleon.
Yeah.
She was changing her appearance, personality.
Exactly.
To fit the role. And I think one case that really highlights this is the case of Leah,
Okay.
who was an off-duty flight attendant. So they're sitting next to each other on a flight to Brisbane.
Right.
And Jodi, she sees an opportunity.
Yeah. So what does she do?
Well, she creates this whole elaborate story, right? Says her family owns a seafood business that she works as a psychologist. All fabricated.
Just totally made up.
Yeah.
Just to gain Leah's trust.
And it worked.
I bet it did.
While Leah was in the restroom, Jodi stole her driver's license.
And that's all it took.
It's a simple act.
Yeah.
But with huge consequences.
Absolutely. I mean, she cleaned out Leah's bank account. $10,000. Gone.
Wow.
And for Leah and her family, it wasn't just about the money. Their accounts were frozen for 6 months. It totally disrupted their lives.
Yeah.
And that's what people don't always realize about identity theft. It's that sense of violation, the vulnerability the victims feel.
It's a really powerful reminder, I think, that behind these crimes are real people whose lives are being turned upside down.
Right.
And, for Jodi, this was just one of many, many victims.
Yeah.
And the police uncovered this whole trail of fraud spanning multiple states.
Yeah. And the investigation was really complicated by the fact that she just seemed to disappear.
Yeah.
Vanish into thin air. I mean, she was always one step ahead. And that's thanks, in part, to her knowledge of police tactics.
Right.
I mean, there were a few times where she escaped capture just minutes before the police arrived.
It's almost like she had like a sixth sense. Like she could sense danger.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this one case where she literally just walks across the street, right in front of a police car that's rushing to a bank.
No way.
Where she had just committed fraud.
I don't even know what to say to that. It's just mind-blowing, that level of confidence and, the ability to blend in.
Yeah.
Even in a situation where you'd think she would stand out.
Yeah. And so all of that leads us to probably the most intriguing part of this case. And that's Jodi's relationship with Andrew Twining.
Okay.
Who was an acting sergeant in the Victoria Police Force.
Oh, wow. Talk about irony. I mean, you have this con artist who's fixated on law enforcement. Right.
And then she ends up in a relationship with a police officer.
Yeah, it's almost too perfect, right?
It really is. So how do they meet?
They met on an online dating site.
Oh, okay.
And she presented herself as this adventurous, free-spirited woman, even hinted at being bisexual, into bondage.
Oh, wow.
It was a persona that was designed to attract attention.
And it clearly worked.
Yeah, and she kept up this charade throughout their entire relationship, claiming to be a flight attendant.
Well,
she even wore a Virgin Airlines uniform when she met his parents.
Oh, my gosh. The level of deception, it's hard to wrap your head around it.
It is. And Twining had no idea. He was completely in the dark about her true identity.
And he fell for her. Hard.
Yeah. And it's a classic example, I think, of a con artist preying on someone's vulnerability.
Right.
Using their emotions for personal gain.
Exploiting their trust.
Yeah. And eventually, the police, they realized that Twining had this connection to Jodi.
And that became this major turning point in the investigation.
Oh, I bet. They saw a way to use him to catch her.
Right. And they went to him with this difficult proposition.
Yeah.
To participate in a sting operation.
Wow. Can you imagine? I mean, to find out that the woman you love, the woman you've built a life with, is actually a master criminal who's been lying to you this whole time.
It's got to be devastating.
Absolutely devastating.
But he agreed to help.
He did. He did.
That couldn't have been an easy decision.
No, not at all.
No.
I mean, it meant putting himself at risk, both emotionally and legally.
Yeah, for sure.
So they set up this meeting.
Where?
In Sydney, hoping to catch her red-handed.
Okay.
The plan was to meet at this pub
Uh-huh.
called Scruffy Murphy's.
Okay.
At 4 a.m.
4 a.m.
Yeah. But Jodi, of course, always one step ahead.
Yeah.
She got out of a taxi into Twining's car before the police could intercept her.
So close. It was a close call, but the police, they adapted quickly. They tailed their car through the city streets, and they finally pulled them over in Ultimo.
And that was it.
Jodi Harris, Australia's most elusive con artist, was finally in custody.
Gotcha. It's really amazing, though, how she was able to pull off that double life. I mean, for so long, to deceive, not just, strangers, but someone you're supposed to, be in a relationship with.
Right.
It takes real detachment.
Yeah. And the manipulation, it's incredible, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And constant lying, making up stories, even going so far as to wear, the uniform to convince Twining's parents. I mean, it makes you wonder, like, what was going on in her head?
Yeah.
Was it all just a game?
Well, it's hard to know for sure, but, I think her behavior after she was arrested, in custody, that gives us a little bit of insight. Mm-hmm. She didn't show much remorse, at least, at first. In fact, she seemed to almost enjoy telling everyone about what she had done.
Yeah.
Like bragging about her techniques.
Yeah. There's a story about a bank teller who recognized that an account was flagged for fraud. Okay. But ignored the warning because Jodi just looked trustworthy.
Wow. That's incredible. And it's, it really shows you that appearances can be deceiving and how good con artists are at exploiting, our biases.
Yeah.
Our assumptions.
And, and she even called the detective in charge of the investigation.
She did?
Gave him these cryptic clues about where she was.
Oh, wow.
Almost like she was taunting him, like playing this this cat and mouse game.
It's like she thrives on that, the thrill of the chase.
Yeah.
That adrenaline rush from outsmarting the police, always being one step ahead.
Right. But it eventually backfired. Right.
Yeah.
So the sting operation worked.
It did.
And she was arrested. And then, being behind bars, facing the consequences, that's when we start to see, I think, a different side of Jodi Harris.
Okay. How so?
Well, that defiance that she had, it kind of starts to fade.
Mm-hmm.
And she becomes surprisingly cooperative. She agrees to help make this training video.
Really?
Yeah, for police and bank staff.
Wow.
And she basically outlines, all her methods, how she was able to do this, how she was able to fool people. And she even talks about, how she would memorize credit card numbers.
Just like that.
Yeah, just by glancing at them. And it was a wake-up call, for law enforcement.
Yeah.
To show them how easy it was for someone with their skills.
Right.
To take advantage of systems, even systems that seem secure.
That's amazing. And I think, it was a real turning point, not just for the investigation, but possibly for Jodi as well.
Yeah.
It suggests, I think, that maybe there's a shift in her perspective.
Yeah.
That she's willing to kind of admit the harm she caused.
Right.
And maybe there's even a desire to make amends.
And I think that willingness to cooperate, it played a part in her sentencing. So in New South Wales, she got a 4-year jail term. And she was ordered to pay like over $175,000 in compensation.
Wow.
And she also had charges in Victoria and Queensland.
Right.
Which, resulted in more sentences and financial penalties.
It sounds like, the punishment really fit the crime.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, though, because while she was held accountable for what she did,
right,
it seems like the justice system also, acknowledged that she could change.
Yeah.
That there was the potential for rehabilitation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, her sentences included suspended sentences, several compensation orders, suggesting that maybe she could turn her life around.
And it sounds like she might have.
She did.
She did.
Yeah. So after she was released in 2010, she basically vanished. You don't hear about her anymore.
Interesting.
There's no record of her reoffending.
Wow. Okay.
And instead, she went back to school, got a master's degree.
That's incredible. What a transformation. I mean, from someone who spent years deceiving people to getting a higher education. It's amazing.
It is. And I know some people might be skeptical.
Yeah.
And think, oh, was this genuine? Or was this just, another act, another manipulation?
Right.
But the fact remains, she hasn't been involved in any criminal activity that we know of since her release.
It really makes you think about, the nature of redemption. Can someone who has lived a life of crime truly change?
A good question.
Is it possible to kind of leave that past behind and build a new future based on, on honesty?
Yeah. And it's something that we'll talk more about in just a second. We'll explore the psychology of con artists. What motivates them, what drives them to deceive, and whether there really is any hope for real change.
It really is a question, isn't it? That's fascinated criminologists and psychologists for so long.
Yeah.
What makes a con artist tick?
Right.
Is it nature? Is it nurture? Yeah. Are they born with this predisposition to deceive, or is it their experiences that shape them?
Yeah. And I think in Jodi's case, it's probably it's probably a combination. But that early exposure to a world of secrets and lies,
right.
Seeing her parents involved in criminal activity, those allegations of abuse. I mean, you can see how that would really distort a young person's sense of right and wrong.
Oh, absolutely. And for some, that kind of early trauma, it can lead to this really deep distrust of authority.
Yeah.
The feeling that the rules just don't apply to them. And it can also create this need for control, this desire to manipulate people, to manipulate situations, to try to feel safe.
And that need for control, I think, maybe explains why she was drawn to impersonating, people in positions of authority.
Yeah.
Police officers, doctors.
Yeah.
Psychologists. It's like she was trying to take their power.
Yeah.
Turn the table.
Right. To kind of gain control over the very system that had, let her down.
Right. Exactly.
There's also this psychological theory
Okay.
called the dark triad.
Okay.
And this this theory helps explain, some of the personality traits that you often see in con artists.
Okay, so break that down for me. What exactly does that mean?
Well, so it includes narcissism,
Yeah.
Machiavellianism,
Okay.
and psychopathy.
Okay.
So narcissism, that's, someone who has this really inflated sense of self-importance.
Right.
They need constant admiration,
Hmm.
and they just lack empathy. And then you have Machiavellianism.
Yeah.
And that refers to, people who are manipulative, very cunning, willing to use any means necessary to get what they want. And then psychopathy, that's marked by a lack of remorse, impulsivity,
Okay.
a disregard for social norms.
So are you saying that all con artists are psychopaths?
No, not necessarily. But, a lot of them do exhibit at least some of these traits. They're often very charming, very persuasive, able to gain people's trust and then, of course, exploit it for their own benefit. They don't feel guilty about hurting others because they don't have that empathy.
Yeah.
And they're often driven by this need for power.
Right. It's a scary thought, isn't it?
It is.
To think that someone could be that disconnected from the impact of their actions.
Yeah.
But, Jodi's story does, I think, offer a glimmer of hope. Her cooperation with the police, going back to school, it suggests, maybe there's some self-awareness there.
Yeah.
That she wants to break free from that destructive behavior.
And that's what's so fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
About human nature. Even people who have done terrible things, they can evolve, they can grow.
Right.
I mean, whether Jodi's change was truly genuine or just another, con,
Yeah.
that's still up for debate. But it does make us think about redemption.
Right.
Even in these really unlikely circumstances.
So her story, it really does leave us with more questions than answers, doesn't it?
It does. It really does.
It forces us to kind of confront these darker parts of human nature, the motivations for why people deceive and the possibility of second chances. What are your takeaways? What really stood out to you?
I think for me, what's really stayed with me is this idea that we all have the capacity for both good and evil.
Yeah.
Jodi's story is a perfect example of how easily someone can get caught up in this life of crime. But it also shows us that we have choices. We have the power to break free from these patterns and create a new path for ourselves.
Yeah. It's a message of hope, even though it's a complicated one. And it reminds us that we should never underestimate that human capacity, for both darkness and light. So from one person who fooled people into believing they were a top undercover detective to another, Simon will be reviewing this case with Tom on Sunday. But in the meantime, tune in tomorrow for another great true crime episode.